We're very thankful for Steve. We found out
Darla?
about Steve. Yes.
Just real quick.
Sorry, Greg. Oh my gosh. I was going to forget you again. I didn't write you down. How do I forget Greg? He's like across the hallway. All right, go ahead, Greg. Update.
Okay, I'm going to be very brief to not take away from the time of our great guest speaker. Just want to give a quick update. Not going to do a full legislative reveal because, as Darla said, we're going to do that on Tuesday night. So I hope everybody can make it there. The legislature starts on Monday, but they've actually already taken quite a bit of activity this week. I was down at the Capitol yesterday for a sunset hearing for the Department of Transportation. As those who have been on this call for a while know, we're heavily engaged in the transportation area. And one of our focuses this session will be making sure we have good reforms for ADOT and future transportation planning in the state. Initially, it looked like they were going to get kind of a clean continuation for 8 years. Hobbs right now presides over those agencies. So we think that many of these agencies should be getting much shorter continuation so the legislature can provide good oversight. The good news is it was a long meeting. There were a lot of questions asked. ADOT got, kind of a little exposed on the VMT, vehicle miles traveled, trying to limit how much we drive. They also got called out on some DEI trainings that they're doing with their staff. Now, they first said they're not doing them, then admitted that they're optional regardless. State monies are going to fund these DEI trainings. So the good news is the outcome of that committee was a much shorter recommendation for a continuation period. Many on the committee were asking for 2, which is what we'd like to see. Some where they ended up is recommending between 4 and 6. But this will be a process. They'll have a bill that'll include some reforms, so that'll be a big issue for us. So just wanted to alert you guys. The legislature has not officially started, but they've already have the wheels running down there. And then, starting next week, session starts on Monday. They'll have opening ceremonies. They'll kick off with many committees already having agendas next week. And I will catch up with everybody on the call starting next Friday to give regular legislative updates. And if you want the big picture of what we're doing, again, come see us Tuesday night. We'd be happy to see you and hang out for an evening, get some popcorn, soda, and an awesome T-shirt as Luann is holding up. So I'll turn it back over to you, Darla, we have good time with our special speaker.
Thanks, Greg. And again, starting next week, guys, our Fridays will be Legislative Scoop by Greg and Amy with calls to action. And we're going to be focused on making sure you all know how to log into your azleg.gov request to speak system so you can give your opinion on these bills that they're discussing in committee. So we're going to change direction starting next Friday back to our Legislative Scoops by Greg and Amy. And there's going to be opportunities to sign up to go down to the Capitol and listen to some of these discussions as well. And so when April comes back next Friday, look in our emails, you will see a link for Sign Up Genius to go on these they're not really tours, but they're guided by us into the committee's hearing rooms to watch what's happening. All right, thanks, Greg, for chiming in there. I don't know why I do that. I should write my order down better, so apologize for that. All right, Steve, friend, 12-year veteran of the FBI, I hear. He's the FBI whistleblower you guys have been hearing about and we've been talking about. He's a fellow on domestic intelligence and security services at the Center for Renewing America, and he's the author of True Blue. He's a FBI special agent turned whistleblower. He unveiled the FBI's questionable investigations of Capitol protesters and how these tactics are not new and date back to the FBI's origins and what must be done to fix the FBI. Steve is an opinion writer, author, and former state and federal law enforcement officer with more than a decade of experience. He worked as a patrolman and narcotics agent in Savannah, Georgia, before joining the FBI in 2014. Steve, thank you so much for joining us and giving us insider scoop on what's happening. So I'm just going to pass this to you and you can tell us your story and then we'll open it up for questions at the end to our folks here. Welcome.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much, Darla. And thank you everybody for giving me some of your time on a Friday afternoon. I'm on the East Coast, so it's Friday night here, but I know everybody kind of likes to hit the road a little early and start their weekend. So thanks for your attention here. I think it'll be worth your time. I'm going to do my best to give you a lot of information. And I will tell you right off the bat that this information can be found in a written form and in some small video snippets if you want to share it with others who are unable to make the call. And you have to go to americarenewing.com, and that's the Center for Renewing America, our website. And it's a think tank. It's a 501c3. And we also have a sister organization. Leslie is on this call, Leslie White. She is the organizer in Arizona, and that is called Citizens for Renewing America. And we partner together. They're the grassroots activist side of things. And one of the things that we do together is a call such as this. It's once a week on Thursday, and Russ Vogt, our organizer, or our president of our organization, he gets on there, gives you about 15 minutes about what's going on at the national level. I think it's worth your time. It's definitely a lot of information, again, thrown at you in a concise format. And you can sign up for that if you go to slingofdavid.com, and you can sign up for it. So with that aside, just want to give you all a little summary on who I am and really the information that I think is vital about what's going on with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. So my name is Steve Friend. I worked for the FBI beginning in 2014. I spent 7 years working on Indian reservations, arrested about 150 violent criminals, opened about 200 cases, was a member of the SWAT team when I was out there. Relocated in the summer of 2021 to Florida, where I currently live, to work on violent crimes against children, so child trafficking and child pornography cases. Did that for a number of months officially until their directive came down from my higher ups that said that I was not to work those cases anymore. They were no longer a priority for us. They were a local matter going forward, and I needed to focus on January 6th cases. Well, up to that point, I hadn't had any interaction with January 6th. Took it on good faith that my fellow colleagues at the FBI were doing a good job on those. I was really just focused on what I was doing. But at that point is when I got a look at what is happening with the January 6 cases and the way they're being mismanaged, the way the FBI is departing from the way that it typically handles cases. And essentially, January 6 should be one case. It is instead a separate case for every single person who the FBI identified as a subject. And instead of being one case in Washington, D.C., which would make sense in all of my experience in carrying forward investigations, they opened a separate case and then assigned it to where the person lived. So if they lived in Arizona, it would be a Phoenix domestic terrorist investigation. And as a result of that, now we've created this false narrative that there are thousands of domestic terrorists around the country. I had a problem with that. And then secondly, and probably more importantly, I had a problem with the way that my office was going to be bringing one of the January 6 subjects into custody. He had been approached by the FBI and said he would cooperate, and we did not contact him for 18 months. And then they decided to send a SWAT team to his house to arrest him. And I felt that that was an unnecessary risk to his safety, to our safety. Essentially, it was a Ruby Ridge type of scenario in the making. So I brought forward my concerns to my executive management. I cited my oath of office. I cited my experience. And more importantly, and I think most impactfully, I cited the training that everyone in the FBI does. And that is we go to the Holocaust Memorial and we go to the MLK Memorial. And the purpose of the field trip that they make every employee go, which has been going on since James Comey was the director, so about 10 years now. The point of that trip is to hammer home the message that civil rights atrocities and genocides can only occur if the police just follow orders. The banality of evil is real, and it's incumbent on you as an employee of the FBI to throw the flag if you believe and perceive that we are headed in any way, shape, or form down that road, because we can't wait for that to happen. Never again is actually a thing. So I cited my training, I cited my oath of office, and within 30 days was escorted out of the FBI. The FBI has abused and manipulated and circumvented whistleblower protections and has now retaliated against a number of us. And in October of 2022 is when my name actually became public. It was 30 days after I'd first come forward. And that was when most people think that my story sort of ended until I wound up testifying May of last year. But just a couple more things about what the FBI is willing to do to one of its own. My wife had her job taken away from her within 3 weeks, and it was in connection with the federal government. The FBI leaked my medical information to the New York Times and told them that I was under investigation for shooting a firearm in my backyard. There was a gag order that came down from the FBI's inspection division, which is essentially internal affairs, and they said I was not allowed to talk about anything with my family, with my attorney. I had to participate in a compelled interview with the security division where they tried to get me into a lying to a federal agent trap so they could execute a search warrant and actually arrest me for committing federal crimes. I requested to have outside employment because I was suspended. I was not terminated. I was a suspended agent, so they take away your salary and they tell you to go home, but you're still technically an employee of the FBI, and they will resolve your situation within a matter of years. And during that time, you can actually request outside employment. I requested twice and was immediately denied both of those requests. So essentially try to bleed you white financially in the hopes that you will just resign out of a financial necessity, and then they can just say whatever you told us was just the ramblings of an angry ex-employee. I have it on pretty good authority that there's one, if not two, open domestic terrorist cases in which I'm a subject. I am continually surveilled when I fly, as I've been experiencing in the last year. I always play the game, spot the Fed when I am at the airport gate, and I've been able to identify a number of them and actually take photographs of them and sit next to them. And lastly, we touched on this. I wrote this book, and the FBI wanted to censor significant portions of it, everything pertaining to my whistleblowing, my involvement with the Gretchen Whitmer arrests that happened in Michigan in 2020, and I didn't do that. So it's out there. It's all available to you. So that's my personal experience. But really what I want to drill down on is when I had the opportunity to testify in May in front of the Select Committee on the Weaponization of the Government, which is part of the Judiciary Committee, I sat down, I went up there, I was there for 8 hours, and I had a lot of good info that I'd already provided to them during my depositions. And that was really the show that I was intending to bring this information to the American people. But unfortunately, politicians really kind of just like to take their 5 minutes to monologue and get on TV and get some good material to get them on the news that night and maybe campaign. And as a result of that, it was a lost opportunity. So I've made it my mission in the last 8 months, whenever I have an opportunity to speak to anybody in the public, to share the information that I wanted to that day, because I think that that will be the genesis for a call for significant reform to the FBI outside of my whistleblowing on that one particular item. So if you will, I know you have me on your screen now, just imagine that I'm on the screen during a congressional testimony, and let's gauge whether or not this would have been more impactful than what we saw last May. Number one, the FBI has a quota system that is called Integrated Program Management, IPM. It dictates the number of cases that have to be opened, the arrests that they have to have for every year, the tools that they have to use, among a plethora of other items. And the problem with that is that it perversely and inversely incentivizes the FBI, because the purpose of law enforcement is to bring the crime down in your neighborhood. That's why you elect your sheriff. But the FBI is now incentivized to bring the crime numbers up, because that will justify its existence. That will justify a larger and an enhanced budget for itself. And there are senior executives in the FBI that get bonuses because the quota is met in the area of $30,000 to $50,000 a year, which, as it relates to January 6th, is why the January 6th case was organized the way it was. It was enabled them to hit all the metrics in spades for the domestic terrorist stats that they had, because the demand for domestic terrorism in this country from the FBI vastly exceeds the actual supply of it, which theoretically is a good thing. You want to live in a safe country. But if you're a bureaucracy intent on growing and actually financially profiting, you need to juke the stats to get those numbers up, which is what they did with January 6th. It's not unique to January 6th. But it certainly is the largest example that has ever been perpetrated. From a personal standpoint with the quota system, I've had times where I was told to actually delay arresting people because we'd already hit our quota for the year. And I should wait till the next year rolled over so that I could essentially sandbag, because we didn't want the numbers to be up too high, because then we would have to do more next year. So why don't you just delay for a few months, and then we will hit the ground running next fiscal year, Steve. And also, I've had times where there were multiple people involved in a crime, and as a result of that, there is a stat that the FBI keeps track of that they have invented for themselves called a disruption. and that is essentially an organization that you disrupt its criminal activities or its terrorist activities, normally because you arrest one of its members. But you can only disrupt an organization once a day, according to the FBI's definition. So in my case, there were 9 people involved in a scheme, and I was told that instead of arresting them all together on one day, that I should arrest one person on Monday, another on Tuesday, a third on Wednesday, et cetera, because then we could get 9 disruptions as opposed to 1 disruption. So it's playing a game with statistics because they want to be able to go to Congress and say, you gave us 11 billion last year, why don't you give us 12? Number 2, the National Security Branch for the FBI has grown out of control in the last quarter century since September 11th. So 9/11 happened, and the military went overseas to address the threat, and they did a really good job. And then there wasn't a whole lot to do for the FBI, which received the responsibility of being the sentry on the wall, protecting the homeland. And there just weren't the terrorist threats that people thought that they were there. But bureaucracy as it is a self-licking ice cream cone. So they started to look for work, which is how in the early 2000s we got the phrase homegrown violent extremist. And that was sold to the American people as Muslim Americans, maybe first generation, maybe Muslim immigrants to the country. And they had sympathies for Al-Qaeda or for Boko Haram, Al-Shabaab, something to that effect. But if you actually dig into the details of many of these cases, they were essentially vulnerable people who the FBI entrapped using undercovers and informants to get them to commit to doing things that they were not predisposed to do, so the FBI could then come in with a hammer and say, look, we stopped a terrorist attack from happening, which is why you have the Liberty City 7 case, which for anybody who watched the Dinesh D'Souza movie, Police State, I had a hand in that. In that movie, Dinesh profiled that case, Liberty City 7, which was in Florida. It is still the largest Al-Qaeda arrest in the history of the FBI, and not one person was actually associated with Al-Qaeda. Evolution continued after the homegrown violent extremist to the domestic violent extremist that we've heard a lot about in the last few years. And those are people who the profile says they fly a Betsy Ross or Gadsden flag. Maybe they go to the school board meetings and they are very vocal. And now we have the latest evolution off of domestic violent extremist, and that is what the FBI and the Department of Homeland Security have co-authored an assessment, and they published it a couple of years ago, actually. And the acronym for this group is the AGAVE, the AGAAVE, the Anti-Government, Anti-Authority Violent Extremist. And that is a person, according to the FBI, who has a perception of government overreach, negligence, or illegitimacy. So if you have a perception that the government might have overreached with COVID, or they might be a little bit negligent on the southern border, or you have questions about the largest mail-in ballot operation that was ever conducted in the history of the country, you now can fall squarely within the crosshairs as a domestic terrorist as far as the FBI is concerned, and they may open up an investigation on you. You have Joe Biden, who spoke a couple Octobers ago, and he described the domestic violent extremists as white supremacists. And the top priority within the FBI's counterterrorism division is now white supremacy, even though you are twice as likely to be struck and killed by lightning in this country than killed by a white supremacist. Those are 2 points, but I think what sums it up the best between the quota system and the National Security Branch exponentially growing is the FBI stat that it put forward about disrupting domestic terrorism last fiscal year. The quota for them was 600 disruptions of domestic terrorist organizations around the country. Unfortunately for them, they fell short and they only got 397, so about 400 of them for the year, which would mean the FBI disrupted a domestic terrorist attack in the United States of America every single day of the year and twice on Sunday. They're not that good. It's a manipulation. The FBI is now weaponizing and process crimes and reinterpreting the law to go after their perceived political enemies. So you take a case like General Mike Flynn. James Comey has publicly said that he sent agents to interview Mike Flynn at the White House when he was the National Security Advisor. And a lieutenant of James Comey said that our goal is to get him to lie so that we can charge him with a crime. That is find me the man, and I will show you the crime. Reinterpreting the law, go to January 6th, which fortunately now the Supreme Court is going to be looking at, but is the obstruction of an official proceeding felony charge that over 300 January 6 subjects have been charged with. That is a law that came from the Enron scandal. It's actually a tax law, and it pertained to the Arthur Andersen accountants who were shredding documents. Side note, they were shredding documents in accordance with their policy to do it, but the FBI and the DOJ at the time and Congress then passed this law that said that essentially they were obstructing that investigation, and as a result of that, they were committing a felony. It's evidence tampering. But the FBI and the Department of Justice are now reinterpreting that law and applying it to anyone who walked through the Capitol and saying that that was an obstruction of an official proceeding. So reinterpreting the law, applying it to people to tack on a felony, to coerce them to plead guilty to misdemeanors, or to actually add mandatory jail time, or to actually necessitate a SWAT team arrest them because they've now been charged with a federal felony as opposed to a misdemeanor. The FBI is now an intelligence agency rather than a law enforcement agency. And you can go to their own literature on this. The FBI has a rule book. It is called the Domestic Investigations Operations Guide, the DIOG. Page 1, where they lay out what they are and what they exist to do. The first priority of the FBI is domestic intelligence collection. The second priority is actually criminal investigations. The joke that I have with my friends is that we call the FBI a trans intelligence agency, because they have kept the bulge, and the bulge is the gun and the badge. They actually have the ability to take away your freedom, to take away your life if necessary. And that is the stuff of the Stasi and the KGB. That is not what we perceive law enforcement to be in this country historically. There's a problem with intelligence investigations when you compare them to law enforcement. Law enforcement is very linear because the crime happens, the police investigate, and then the person is either convicted, they plead guilty, or they're acquitted at trial, and then the case is closed. With intelligence investigations, they are circular in nature. So you identify a person so you can learn information about them. And because there's not a perceived prosecution that's going to happen, you don't have to really respect their civil rights. And then once you learn information about them, why do you learn that information? Well, so you can learn more information. You learn information just to learn more until you need it, which is how you get the Russia collusion intelligence investigation and then apply it to Mike Flynn and you get him with the process crime. So you can see how it all connects to itself just for the right time. The FBI is colluding with big tech. I've got a relationship with Matt Taibbi, so he's doing the Twitter files, and he's been doing it for the last year and a half. Which has gotten quite a bit of attention. There was another story that Miranda Devine, who is another acquaintance of mine, broke at the New York Post, October of 2022, and that was about Operation Bronze Griffin, which didn't get a lot of traction and probably should have. That is an informant who works for Meta, for Facebook, for Instagram, and then provides individuals private communications, private messages to the FBI without a warrant, without a subpoena, and without the user's consent. And then the FBI takes that and then works backwards to justify having it. And a lot of times it's out of context. I've seen it. It's out of context statements that someone could make, and it'll be something to the effect of, we need to go out and fight. And then the FBI says, oh, look, it's a call to violence. We need to investigate this violent domestic terrorist. And then you get the full context and it says, we need to go out and fight to win the next election. So let's go knock on doors. But at that point, the FBI already has its case opened. It has its target, and it's going to investigate that person for the foreseeable future. Around and around we go. There's a dysfunctional promotion process that exists in the FBI. It's essentially leads to this revolving door of unqualified and ambitious people ascending the management ladder. And the FBI is, I say ladder, it's more of a pyramid, because as you get closer to the top, obviously your circle of friends gets smaller and smaller. And then when you get to the very tippy top, those are the people who are politically captured that are giving the directives down to the line, down to the bottom of the pyramid where it's really broad. And people then can be compartmentalized into things where they're really not aware of what they're doing unless they take a step back and look at the whole mosaic, which is what was my experience, where I was told, Steve, we know you have an objection to what's going on with this January 6th case, where we're sending this SWAT team and we might have violated some of our policies, we might be violating some of his civil rights, but your only job is really just to drive him from one spot to another, and that's it. And you could easily see how someone might justify their job then and say, look, I've got a family to feed, and it's not worth it. But from my perspective, I took an oath of office and I had some training on it, so that's where I threw the flag. But back to the promotion process, the way you actually promote in the FBI is you invent a solution and then find a problem to apply it to. And that's how you get people who sort of self-select into government. You grow the government. If you're willing to do that, you never say no to a bad idea, you can promote rather quickly in the FBI. And the schedule to do that is very quick. It's every 18 months you need to be promoting. Yeah, and your passion is in promotion, not in actually doing a good job of where you're at. You come up with a new initiative in your first 6 months. The middle 6 months is when you start looking for your next spot, and the last 6 months is when you leave. And you leave in your wake an unfinished product that the people that are there have to deal with. But it's not your problem. You've already put it on your resume and you've promoted. And they're very incentivized to promote because they don't want to get stuck where they are. And as a result of that, you have a situation like Jennifer Moore, who was the special agent in charge of intelligence in Washington, D.C. on January 6, 2021, even though her background was in human resources, and she'd never done anything connected to intelligence in her entire career in the FBI. She was promoted 2 times after that and eventually became an executive assistant director. You have someone else like Jacqueline McGuire, who was a special agent in charge of Philadelphia, who was involved in sending agents to go arrest Mark Houck, who was the pro-life activist, who was charged with a FACE Act violation when a Planned Parenthood employee accosted his son and he pushed him down. She approved of a dozen armed agents going to arrest him, even though he said he would cooperate. And then she was later involved in a shooting inside of city limits where she was walking her dog on her off time and shot a dog that was involved in some sort of fight with hers, killed it. She was promoted right after that to executive assistant director of training. So she now gives the guns to the new agents. Those are just 2 of the great examples that the FBI has. There are broken informant protocols. I sort of touched on Bronze Griffin. But what you have to understand about the informant in the FBI, who the FBI calls a confidential human source, a CHS. In order to recruit sources, the FBI performs a Type 5 assessment, and that is essentially a dossier. It is an investigation of an innocent American where they try to find where their pressure points are, where their motivations are, what their access is to information that they can give back to the FBI. And they do that on their own initiative. They launch an investigation of an innocent person. And who can the FBI recruit? It's not just the lay person. It is journalists, lawyers, members of the clergy, and children without their parental consent. Those are the potential sources of information from the FBI's perspective. I will say one anecdote that I had with an informant. I had a very productive informant on an Indian reservation, and we had the pipeline in the Standing Rock Sioux, the Dakota Access Pipeline, that there was a lot of attention about because on that reservation they were protesting it. And the FBI sought me out and said, we want you to ask your source, your confidential human source, if she knows anything about potential threats to the pipeline, because that could be domestic terrorism. I responded to them that she lived in a different state and was a member of a different Native American tribe, so she therefore had 0 access. And the FBI said that I still needed to ask her because she was an Indian and so she might know something. Those are some of the really big problems. In the last year, my cohort of people, if you look behind me, you have our emblem. It's the upside down American flag with the, we call ourselves the Suspendables. It's an upside down FBI badge with the RS in it because it's an agency in distress. So the Suspendables have been able to put forth a lot of disclosures in the last year into the public sphere. I'll go over a couple of those about Christopher Wray abusing his FBI jet privileges, where he makes the jet fly from Manassas to Reagan to pick him up. It's about a 12-minute flight, and then fly him where he needs to go. He goes every Friday to his home in Atlanta, and the jet flies from Manassas to Reagan, Reagan to Atlanta, back to Manassas, then picks him up on Sunday in Atlanta, back to Reagan, back to Manassas. It costs about $40,000. He pays about the price of a Southwest ticket, so about $200 for that privilege. The FBI did surveillance of parents at school board meetings because they made me do it, so I can testify that that actually happened. And that was reassigned from January 6th to, or from child porn to January 6th. And Christopher Wray lied when he testified to the Judiciary Committee that neither of those details were true. I can personally testify that they are true. So he perjured himself. This year, the FBI combined training that it had separate training for becoming a whistleblower, which is the law is 5 U.S.C. 2303, and it's supposed to teach you how to do it legally. And then there's a separate training for identifying insider threats, which is the mole, the Robert Hansen, who could be getting classified and sensitive material and giving it to Russia, something to that effect. And they want you to be on the lookout for red flags. But this year, the FBI combined that training. And it was essentially saying that whistleblowers are an insider threat to the FBI. You need to be on the lookout for them. And parenthetically connected to that, the FBI recruited 300 temporary agents to its security division to investigate fellow employees of the FBI who they deemed to be having questionable loyalty to the United States and potential whistleblowers. The profile of someone having questionable loyalty to the United States was someone who was a military veteran, who had a lot of children, who was unvaccinated against coronavirus, who practiced religious worship regularly, and they didn't like to wear masks, and that they might be a Republican. Some lighter note stuff, there were paid mental wellness hours, 3 hours now a week. Every FBI employee gets to work on their mental wellness. They are changing all the tires on the FBI vehicles from rubber to soy. It's a no-bid contract because there's only one manufacturer of that. There was chair yoga, coloring, painting lessons, and group walks at Human Resources, massage chairs and yoga rooms. And now they're having the hostage rescue team, which is the only full-time SWAT unit they gave them lessons on how to do meditation this last year. So that sort of sums up the high points of really what I was intending to bring to Congress. I think that probably if they had just handed me the mic and said, Steve, why don't you go for 30 minutes? I probably would have been more productive than the 8 hours that I spent there. Like Darla told me before we went online, I'm a little tired of hearing myself speak now. I think that I've probably raised a lot of questions for people. I'm happy to take any comers. And with that, I yield back the floor, Mrs. Chairwoman.
Wow. All I have to say is wow, wow, wow. Like, yes, there's a lot of questions. The first question everyone was wondering, you answered, that's the S. We're all wondering what the S is. So good marketing
the Suspendables, if you go to www.the-suspendables.com, you can support Garrett O'Boyle, who testified with me. He's still, I've resigned from the FBI. He's still actually a indefinitely suspended FBI agent. He hasn't been paid in a year and a half. He has 4 small children, and he's selling T-shirts and hats and lapel pins on that website. It would be great if you were to support him.
I just don't even understand. Like, you might have said this, but what was the basis for them doing this to you? Like, I don't understand. I missed that part, or there was no basis.
So what 5 U.S.C. 2303 says is that the person has to have a reasonable concern of waste, fraud, abuse, or risk to public safety, and they have to bring it to the right chain, the person in their chain of command, to a member of Congress, to the Inspector General. There's it's about 7 different sources. I've brought it to all of them. And the FBI claims that it didn't retaliate against me for whistleblowing. What they did was they suspended my security clearance, which you're not entitled to have. They said that I had actions that gave me questionable loyalty to hold a security clearance. They said that I refused to participate in lawful arrests, which is untrue because they told me I wasn't allowed to. They told me I had to stay home and wasn't allowed to. So they're kind of foisted by their own petard on that. And really where they have me, and I'll plead guilty, is they told me, they said that I improperly accessed sensitive material from the FBI. The sensitive material is the employee handbook that my lawyer asked them to get a copy of. And he asked me to get him a copy of the handbook because of disciplinary procedures. He wanted to know that. It's an unclassified document. Obviously, it gives you guidance on how to take vacation and whatnot. But I improperly accessed the FBI handbook. That's really what I'm guilty of.
So, I mean, I used to do HR. I had to get a receipt that a person received the handbook. That was part of the human resource process, is that everybody had a copy of the handbook. I'm not kidding, and there's a lot of questions, and I promise you guys I'm going to get to as many of these questions as I can before and I'll stop talking with my own questions. But this is the stuff they make movies out of. Are they going to make a movie out of this? Like, I think we've seen some version of the story and just thought it was fantasy. And it to be honest, I don't know if the guys and everybody in the chat here is like, you just described all of us. We all think the government overreaches. We're all worshiping regularly. We're all like, how do we protect ourselves? And how are you protecting you? And how can we, like Leslie likes to say, be bold and bodacious, and not, have the FBI tracking us? How do we still not be afraid?
I'm a firm believer in the doctrine of the lesser magistrate. You have to lean on the local authorities the most. And here's where I will give you some hope on that. There's 14,000 FBI agents outside of the major cities, and even within the major cities, just due to the population. It's impossible for them to actually do their job without cooperation from local agencies. In Daytona, we had 9, 10 agents. There's 1 million people in our area of responsibility. So we had to lean heavily on the sheriff's offices and the police departments. And those are the agencies that you can have a lot of influence with, because your sheriff is accountable to you, you're his constituent, and you can say things like one of the counties here did, and they pulled their people from the FBI and they said, we're not working with you anymore. I think that that's a demand you can have. In Collier County, Florida, I went and spoke there. They passed a city ordinance or a county ordinance. It's a Bill of Rights sanctuary county. And essentially, the sheriff there committed, and the Board of Commissioners committed, that if the federal or even the state authorities came in and were doing things that they deemed to be violative of people's civil rights and their Bill of Rights, that they would stand in the gap and protect them from that. So those are the sorts of things that I think people can take at a local level. You can also pressure your state legislatures. You can get something maybe on some sort of ballot initiative. I've come up with a couple ideas here in Florida where I live, where I think that it should be mandatory for deputies who partner with the FBI and they become task force officers, they become federally deputized. They shouldn't be able to work on national security, because they essentially, because you have to have a clearance, they couldn't tell their sheriff what they're working on. And that's not good for a chain of command. I think we should also say that none of these state certified agencies can partner with the FBI unless the FBI does certain training. And that training should be, you should have to take a course on state law, our state constitution, because we don't want you violating the state constitution. I know you have supremacy when it comes to federal law, but we have the 10th Amendment says we have certain state rights here. And then I think that they should also have to submit to certain firearms training. If you can't pass a state firearms law, why would we trust you to go through a door with you? If our deputies might be at risk, we're not confident that you can fire a weapon the right way. So those are the sorts of speed bumps that you can put up and push forward. And I think there's an adequate justification behind any of those.
Wow, well, that's good to know, because it's kind of you don't know what you don't know, right? So now we're hearing all this and we're like, whoa, so what can we do? Well, now we know there's some policy and different things we can do on a local level. It just seems, I'm listening to you and I'm thinking, what about our constitutional rights? Like they just ignore them, and there's no accountability. There's no, who do we go to? So you're saying we can go to our sheriff and our local place for protection, is what you're saying, if I hear you right.
Yeah, I think that's really a significant impact that you can make, because you can have an audience with your sheriff. I think at a higher level, at a federal level, you need to pressure your elected officials to do certain things, and they can do from the House. They need to defund the quota system. They need to
defund the what? Say it again.
The quota system, integrated
quota
program management. It makes no sense to have that. It's not a widget making company, a factory, that they shouldn't have quotas. You need to defund domestic intelligence collection. And then I've proffered this idea that they should actually defund all armed special agents and every single agency, with the exception of the United States Marshal Service. And that way, if you have an unarmed Bureau of Investigation, they have to partner with the local guys. And the local guys could then be deputized by a U.S. Marshal, and they would be the guns. They would be the force. And then you wouldn't have a 6 o'clock SWAT raid from the FBI because they wouldn't have a SWAT team. And you would then do the bidding of the sheriff, who could say, especially in a state like Arizona, he could say, look, I'm not interested in you going after people who have a Gadsden flag because you don't like their First Amendment protected activity they're engaged in. So my people aren't going to assist you with that. My people are going to assist you with things that I deem to be worth our time and resources. And that would be like fentanyl coming over the border.
Yeah. All right, good. All right, so let me get to, you won't believe all these notes from writing down questions. We always know there's a good discussion when there's a lot of questions. So I'm going to go back to the first ones I wrote down and then scan through chat. So Ray Epps, somebody wants to know if was Ray Epps part of an FBI or in the FBI?
I'd have to give you an educated guess. I think he was an informant of some kind for a federal agency. He's given very loyally answers when he's asked. They ask him, were you an informant? And he says, I've never worked for the FBI. So I think he might have been a Homeland Security informant. And if national security is space, they get a lot of money, and they're only, as an informant, you're only paid if you're productive. So they self-deploy to a lot of areas and then infiltrate themselves and try to get things so they can have good intelligence to get back so they can get paid. But he also might be an FBI informant, because if you're an informant for the FBI, in your admonitions, you are told you do not work for the FBI. So he might just be reciting his admonition that you do not work for the FBI.
Okay. All right. And someone asked, how many FBI agents was involved with the January 6th event?
Well, we know that it's not zero. So as far as I'm assuming they mean undercover, it would be irresponsible of the FBI to not have undercovers there just for a security standpoint. But I think that it's going to bear itself out that there were undercovers there who were doing things, the same things that Ray Epps were doing. They were, and it's not just FBI. We're Metro Police, we're Department of Homeland Security, DEA. They were all there, and they were pushing the crowd to do things that they were not predisposed to do. And here's what I'll say about January 6th, which I think is a nice little synopsis. There were people that did illegal things, bad things, they should be prosecuted. There were people that did dumb things. We can question that. There were informants. There were undercover operatives that were pushing the crowd to do things. But I think that there were people there who went because they were angry at 2020 about seeing cities burn, and they thought there was going to be Antifa there, and there were. And they thought, you know what, I'm going to show up with my body armor and give these Antifa guys the beating their daddy never gave them, because they're owed it. And you should never go somewhere intending for that to happen. But that's why you had these guys that didn't have weapons, but they were kind of prepared for a fight. And then the largest, by far, contingency who was there on January 6th is the group that I've labeled the Miracle on 34th Street crowd. Because if you've seen that movie, the letters to Santa Claus, they walked them into the judge to try to convince him that this is Santa Claus. People were there to exercise their First Amendment of speech, assembly, petition, and redress of grievances. And they thought, we're going to walk through the Capitol 1 million strong, and that will incentivize our elected officials to pause certification of the election and do an actual audit of it, because people had legitimate questions after a mail-in vote.
All right, thank you. Okay, the next question is someone's asking about Sidney Powell, the facts on Sidney Powell.
I don't know Ms. Powell. The Kraken thing that she promised and never delivered on got me kind of scratching my head, but she certainly did a lot of really good work for Mike Flynn. So mixed bag on her as far as her public facing, but I can't really speak to her. I've never talked to her.
Okay. All right. Florence asks, regarding your time on the Indian reservations, Seth Keshel has stated that there was enough fraud on the Indian reservations to have Biden win in Arizona and Nevada. Who would prosecute or stop this from going on in future elections?
Well, if any sort of election fraud is a federal crime, it would be theoretically prosecuted by the Department of Justice. But I have contacts who work or specifically geared towards election crimes, and they've told me that calls have come from the DOJ that said that they are not going to investigate or prosecute any sort of election fraud. They're only interested in voter suppression.
Interesting. Okay. All right. Dwight Kadar. The Kadars are very special to AZ Free, and they'll probably be reaching out to you, Steve. They have a network up in the northern part of Arizona, so be on the lookout for an email from them. But Dwight would like to know, was Phil Haney killed by the government?
I don't know. I mean, I don't have any firsthand. I'm really only comfortable saying things that I have firsthand knowledge about. And I just wouldn't want to steer you wrong. I'm sorry.
It's okay. It's good if you don't know, better to not answer, right?
That's how the testimony works.
All right. Patricia says, I thought the government could not take action against whistleblowers. What is Congress doing to stop this retaliation?
It's a good question. Because they've found the hack with the security clearance, that's something that needs to be shored up. And I think there needs to be a push. Actually, I think the best thing they could do is say, look, you can keep me out if you want, but there needs to be a paid admin leave. Take a guy like Garrett O'Boyle or Marcus Allen. Marcus hasn't been paid in over 2 years. And they just keep you in limbo in the hopes that you will resign because you have financial needs and people can't afford to hang on as long as they can.
And you don't have any legal recourse. There's nothing you can do.
No, and actually the way that I went to the Inspector General, and they initially immediately gave me a rejection letter. I've come to find out though that is an automatically populated letter that they do. And it's because they can't be accused of never responding. And then they go back and look, and then they contacted me months later and said, oh, well, you can come in. But my response to that is, well, how many people came forward with a legitimate concern and got that rejection letter and thought I've exhausted all my options now, and then either resigned or just went put their head down. So they've missed out on opportunities. So that's a problem that needs to be addressed. The Inspector General told me, as far as retaliation goes, they don't really have an appetite to take my case on because looking at the employee handbook was indeed a violation, and they thought that maybe pulling a security clearance was necessary. And it's unfortunate because I mean, I thought I was a good job. I had exemplary performance reviews. I actually got a financial award about 2 months before I was suspended for my work on child pornography. So it was not like a problem child for them.
Yeah, again, it goes back to, it feels like a movie I've seen or something where you're just targeted and I can't even imagine like your loyalty to them and betrayal you must have felt. That's a conversation probably for another day. But if someone asked just now on chat, like if things don't get corrected at the FBI, what's the direction? What do you think's going to happen?
The reforms that are necessary are so massive that it will be, if you actually want to course correct, starting fresh or massive reform, it's really 6 of one, half dozen of the other. There just needs to be an appetite for that from our political leaders. And I think that, like I said, defunding the FBI is something that I would have a preference for. But if you wanted to disarm it and then message it as we're empowering local police, maybe you could get some support for that. But unfortunately, the days are not long before there are going to be significant portions of this country that the FBI brings a case in front of a jury and the jury automatically acquits because they say, well, the FBI is no good. And then therefore the FBI, again, to hit their quota, is they're going to push where there's mush. They're going to take their cases to the blue areas where they're going to get the convictions. And who are they going to go after in the blue areas? The red people. And the country will then balkanize further and further. And the job of the FBI is to maintain law and order, some semblance of it. And they are just contributing to this narrative of my neighbor is a domestic terrorist because he has a Trump flag or a DeSantis sign in his yard. And the FBI will have contributed when the pot finally does boil over.
All right, so I'm gonna end with this. I mean, I think the one question, I mean, I'm reading through chat, and the thing is there's a lot of people on this call that are praising God for you, and I think they're rooting for you and they're thankful for you doing what you're doing. It's I don't think, I may be speaking just for myself, but I think people on this call would agree we don't have enough principled leaders who will put that X on their back to set precedents and to change things. Most of us are not going to do that. Because it's scary. And so there's something that's compelling you to do this. You want to, and I know, and I think you know what my last question is going to be, which will be a little bit lighter, but what is compelling you to do this? What is your compelling vision for this? What keeps you going and not make you just, hey, you know what? I'm just going to go to Alaska and live off the land. What keeps you in this fight?
John Quincy Adams, duty is ours, results are God's. Romans 8:28, all things work for the glory of God and those called according to his purpose.
Amen.
And Esther 4:14, you were born for such a time as this. That's really it. I mean, doing the right thing is not easy, but it's very simple. And I'm here this time, and that's what's on my heart. And I want to lay down my marker for my children, and they can know that Dad did everything and he didn't compromise his values. And look, there was no guarantee I was going to retire from the FBI. My job was to do what I did, so I did my job.
Well, that's great. I had a feeling, and I didn't know this, everybody, but I had a feeling that there was scripture behind when you're grounded and rooted in scripture, the storm can go by, but you don't sway very far, and you always come back to your center. And most people that I meet that have that fortitude and strength to carry the flag, like Steve, have some very grounding scripture and faith. And that's just an observation. So, all right, last thing, and we'll let you off the hook, and then I'll wrap things up on the call. I heard that you wanted to follow in your dad's footsteps and being an accountant. So what made you change your course of direction with your career?
One tax season after college was enough for me to want to go be a cop and get shot at. It just wasn't a good fit for me. My dad and I are really similar personality, except for that one thing. Professionally, we just it wasn't for me. But actually, the accounting degree and experience was one of the core skills that got me into the FBI. So I guess it all did work for a purpose.
Well, you're telling me that you'd rather be shot at than go through another tax season? That says a lot.
I think that I would rather deal with the FBI retaliating against me for whistleblowing than go through a tax season. God bless you if you want to do it.
I think there's a higher purpose there, Steve. We're glad that you're following the call that you have on your life. And Leslie White, Citizens Renewing America. Leslie's the whole reason I'm even in this world, you guys. She plucked me out of the church years ago and saw something in me to work in politics. So Leslie hooked me up with Steve Friend. Thank you, Leslie. If you guys aren't on that Thursday call, please look it up on our AZ Liberty Network calendar, or email me, or sign up with the slingdavid.com, and make sure you're getting your national updates. They're quick and precise and easy calls. Steve, thank you. We hope that we get you back maybe on a different day, but God bless you, and we wish you the very, very, very best. And I know everybody on this call will be praying for you and your safety and your family. So thank you. Thank you for all that you're doing. And I guess we'll let you off the call. Thank you.
Thanks, folks. Oh, American Radicals podcast. It's on Rumble. I'm on there with Garrett every Tuesday.
American
Thursday,
Radical podcast.
Yep, on Rumble.
American Radical, you guys. Remember that, American Radical. I'm a podcastaholic, so I will definitely subscribe.
Yes, ma'am.
American Radical, you got it. Well, thank you, Steve. You've been